Hello and welcome to Drunk on Tea. Today I'm going to show you how to paint this Mordor Troll, ideal for your games of Middle-earth strategy battle game. So the first thing I've done is I've primed the model black, as this will give us a nice, smooth, even base coat for the rest of our colours to work from. Now the first thing I'm going to be painting on this model is the skin, and for this I'll be coming in with some Bugman's Glow. The reason I'm going to paint all of the skin first is because it's such a large area on the model. It makes sense to get all of this painted before moving on to the other areas of the model. So with some Bugman's Glow, work your way around the model and pick out all of the areas of the skin with a couple of layers of Bugman's Glow until we build up to a nice solid base coat all over the areas of skin on the troll. Now you don't have to worry about being too neat at this stage. If you get any of the Bugman's Glow over other areas, it doesn't matter. We'll be coming in with much darker colours later on and painting over these areas. Just make sure you catch all of the areas of skin with a couple of layers of Bugman's Glow. So as you can see, after the first layer, it's still quite patchy coverage, so I'm coming back in with a second coat of Bugman's Glow till I build up to that smooth, solid base colour all over these areas. If after the second coat it's still looking a little bit patchy, come in with a third thin coat of Bugman's Glow until you've got that solid base coat of Bugman's Glow all over the skin. As you're working your way around the model for this second coat, make sure you've covered all of the areas that you want to be covered with Bugman's Glow, so there'll be no areas of skin left showing with some black. And after a couple of layers of Bugman's Glow, you can see I've got a smooth, even base coat all over the areas of exposed skin on the troll. So the next step will be to shade the skin. For this, I'm coming in with some Reichland Flesh Shade, and I'm just going to apply it all over the skin to the troll. Now you don't want this to pull too heavily in any of the recesses, so if it is pulling too much, wick it away with a dry brush. Make sure you shade all of the skin with some Reichland Flesh Shade, covering all of the areas that we painted with Bugman's Glow. And after you've applied the shade to the skin, make sure you give it a nice while to dry, about an hour. So go make yourself a cup of tea and wait for the shade to fully dry before we move on to our next steps. And after that Reichland Flesh Shade has dried, you can see it's added definition all over the skin, sunk into all of the recesses. So now it's time to start highlighting the skin. So first of all, I'm coming back in with some Bugman's Glow, but for this I'm going to dry brush this all over the skin to the model. You can be quite heavy with this dry brush, treating it more like a traditional overbrush. Just make sure you catch all of the areas of skin with a dry brush of Bugman's Glow. This will catch on all of the raised surfaces, but leaving that shade in all of the recesses. And this is a really nice, quick, easy way to get a really nice looking skin tone all over the troll. So just make sure you apply this dry brush all over the skin making sure that flesh shade stays in the recesses, but you catch all the raised areas with some Bugman's Glow. And after that dry brush, you can see it's brightened up all those areas of skin, but left the shade in all of the recesses. So now it's time for another dry brush. And for this I'll be using Cadian Flesh Tone. I'm coming a little bit lighter for this dry brush. Make sure I catch all over the model, focusing onto the most raised areas and bumpy surfaces, leaving some of that Bugman's Glow showing through, but catching the sharpest points with a dry brush of Cadian Flesh Tone. So for this you really don't want to be as heavy as we were with the Bugman's Glow, but still making sure you cover all of the surfaces with a light dry brushing of Cadian Flesh Tone. And finally, with some Kislev Flesh, I'm going to come in and apply another dry brush, but this time much lighter and just focusing on those most raised points of the skin of the troll and all of the sharpest angles. I'm just making sure I catch these with a really light dry brush of Kislev Flesh, so it will sit on the most raised parts, acting like a final highlight. So be really nice and gentle with this dry brush, just make sure you catch all those sharp angles and most raised details with a real light dry brushing of Kislev Flesh. And after that Kislev Flesh applied, that is all of the skin highlighted. As you can see, it's been quite messy over other areas, but that's okay because we'll be painting in the other details next. So for the first detail, I'm coming in with some Dryad bark. I'm going to paint this all over the club he's got in his hands. The alternative build for this model is with him holding a hammer, in which case you can skip this step, but if you've built him using the club like I have here, make sure you catch all of the club with a couple of layers of Dryad bark till we've got a nice solid wood colour all over that club. And after a couple of layers of Dryad bark, you can see we've got a nice solid brown colour all over the wood. So now with some Nuln Oil, I'm going to shade the areas we've just painted with Dryad bark. This will sink into the recesses, add some definition all over the club, really make that wood grain stand out. So just apply some Nuln Oil all over the club that we just painted with Dryad bark. And after that shade has dried, you can see it's really added definition all over his club. So now it's time to come in with another dry brush and we'll highlight up his club. So for this dry brush, I'm coming in with some Baneblade Brown. I'm just going to dry brush this all over the club so it catches the raised details but leaves the wood grain showing in all the recesses and gives us a really nice, quick, simple and easy wood effect on the club. And with that dry brush applied, that is the club highlighted. So now it's time to start painting in the rest of the details. So first of all, with some Mournfang Brown, I'm coming in and we're going to paint any fabric that's on the model. So he's got these parts of fabric here on his arms, so I'm making sure I catch these with a couple of layers of Mournfang Brown, being nice and careful around any of the skin we've already painted. Just make sure you catch any areas of fabric with some Mournfang Brown. So I've been really careful here around his fingers, on his glove, making sure that I catch just the fabric with the Mournfang brown. I'm also going to pick out any bits of fabric here hanging down from his waist. I'm leaving the little bits of metal black for now, but just making sure I catch all of the fabric areas with some Mournfang brown. And finally, he's got these ones here on his shoulders, which I'm also going to pick out with a couple of layers of Mournfang brown. Be really careful around the skin. We've already painted and highlighted. Just pick these out with some Mournfang brown. And with that Mournfang brown applied, we've picked out a lot of the areas of the model now by painting all those areas of fabric. So now it's time to start painting the straps. And for this, I'm coming in with some Rhinox hide. I'm going to paint all the straps on the model. So he's got several on his arms. So I'm making sure I catch these with a couple of layers of Rhinox hide to build up to a nice solid dark brown colour on all of these straps. I'm also picking out these ones, going across his chest and down his back, being nice and careful around all the areas we've already painted, making sure I pick out these straps with a couple of layers of Rhinox hide. And he's also got a belt going around his waist, which I'm going to make sure I pick out with Rhinox hide as well. Being nice and careful with this belt to ensure that once again, I only catch the areas of the belt and I don't catch any areas of skin or Mournfang brown. And with that Rhinox hide applied, we've picked out all of the straps on the model. So now the next thing I'm going to paint is the little bit of fabric he's got on his club. So for this I'm coming in with some Rawk flesh. I'm just going to apply it to this little bit of fabric he's got wound around the handle to his club. Obviously be really careful around areas like the fingers, just making sure I cover all of this with a couple of layers of Rawk flesh. With that Rawk flesh applied, that is the handle to the club picked out. So the next step is I'm going to pick out the scales that are on the troll. So for this I'm coming in with some Abaddon black. I'm going to very carefully pick out each of the scales that are on the model. So he's got some here on his legs and quite a few on his back as well. So make sure you very carefully pick these out with a couple of layers of Abaddon black, being really careful around the skin. You don't want to get any of this over the areas we've already painted and highlighted, but just make sure you pick out all of these with a couple of layers of Abaddon black. Some of these ones here on his back are a little bit larger, so a little bit easier to pick out. But once again, be nice and careful picking these out, trying to avoid getting this over any areas of skin or any of the other areas we've painted with other colours. Just make sure you take your time and pick out all of these scales with a couple of layers of Abaddon black. And with all of those scales picked out, the only base coat left to apply now is to all of the metal on the model. So for this, I'm coming in with some lead belcher. I'm going to apply this over all of the metallic areas on the troll. So it's going to be all of these armour plates here on his chest. I'm going to make sure I pick all of these out with a couple of layers of lead belcher. Obviously being really careful around all the other colours we've already painted. But just making sure I pick out all of these metallic plates on his chest armour. Also going to pick out these much smaller ones here down by his waist. And of course, all of the parts of the helmet, I'm going to make sure I pick all of these out with a couple of layers of lead belcher as well. Once again, being really careful around the face to the troll, make sure I catch all of the helmet. I'm also going to pick out any of the spikes on the club, just making sure I catch these with a couple of layers of lead belcher, as well as any of the armour on his arms as well. And with that lead belcher applied, that is the final base coat applied to the model. So the next step will be to shade the areas we've just painted. So for the first shade, I'm coming in with some known oil. I'm going to apply this all over the areas we painted with Rhinox hide, catching all of these straps with a shade of known oil. And I'm also going to paint it over all of the areas we painted with lead belcher as well. So that's all of the armour panels, the helmet, and the parts on his club. Going to make sure I catch all of these with a shade of known oil. And now with some Agrax Earthshade, I'm going to apply this shade all over the areas of Mournfang Brown. So all of the fabric, trying to be really careful when around areas of the skin, just want to get this shade over the Mournfang Brown. And I'm also going to apply it over the handle to his club as well. Going to make sure I catch all of these straps with some Agrax Earthshade. If you're enjoying the video, please press like. If you want more videos, press the subscribe button and ring the notification bell. If you would like to support the channel and become a member, please press the join button down below. And after all of those shades have dried, you can see it's added definition to all of those areas of our troll. So now it's time to start highlighting these areas. First of these I'm going to highlight is the fabric. So I'm coming in with some Mournfang Brown. I'm going to paint this in all of the areas that the shade didn't settle. Wherever the Agrax Earthshade settled in a recess, I'm leaving that in the recess and coming in on either side of it with a layer of Mournfang Brown. This will keep the definition that came from our Agrax Earthshade, while also bringing the rest of the brown back up to that brighter colour of Mournfang Brown. So keep your paint nice and thin at this stage. You just want to brighten up the areas that the shades didn't settle. So just work your way around the model and on all the areas of fabric that the shades didn't settle, brighten them back up to colour with a layer of Mournfang Brown. And with that Mournfang brown applied, you can see it's brightened those areas of fabric up, but left the definition from the shade in all of the recesses. So now, with a 50-50 mix of Mournfang brown and Scrag brown, I'm going to come in and apply a bit of this mix in the middle of all the areas that we just applied the Mournfang brown. So focus this onto the most raised edges and details, areas that the light would catch the most, and just apply a little bit of this 50-50 mix in the middle of all the areas that we just applied our previous step. Once again, keep this nice and thin so it allows a little bit of the Mournfang brown to show through, but this will brighten up these areas a little bit more, give us a nice transition up to our brightest highlights. So once again, just take your time at this step, work your way around the model, and just apply a little bit of this mix in the middle of all the areas that we just applied the Mournfang brown. And with that mix applied, it's brightened up those areas a little bit more. So now it's time to come through with one final highlight, just to really make the fabric stand out. So for this highlight, I'm coming in with some pure Scrag brown. And I'm going to apply this as an edge highlight on the edge and all the sharpest folds of the fabric. So wherever you've got a sharp edge or sharp fold, I'm just applying a thin edge highlight of Scrag brown on all the sharpest points of the fabric. So really take your time at this step, keep these lines nice and thin, and just apply a thin edge highlight of Scrag brown all over the sharpest points to the fabric. Make sure you catch the edges of all the areas of fabric with a thin edge highlight of Scrag brown, as well as catching all the most raised prominent folds on the fabric. Just make sure you catch all of these areas with a thin edge highlight of Scrag brown. And with that Scrag brown applied, you can see it's really made that fabric stand out and added interest to all those areas of the model. So now the next thing we're going to highlight is all the straps. And for that, I'll be coming in with some Gawthor brown. I'm just going to apply this as a thin edge highlight around all of the areas that we paint with Rhinox hide. So wherever you've got a sharp edge to any of the details, I'm applying a really thin edge highlight of Gawthor brown on all of these edges, just to really make them stand out and add some contrast to that Rhinox hide. So once again, just take your time with this step and just apply a thin edge highlight of Gawthor brown to all the areas of strapping on our Mordor Troll. Don't forget these ones here on his back. Just make sure you catch these with a thin edge highlight of Gawthor brown as well. And with that Gawthor brown applied, that's all of the straps highlighted. So the next step is I'm going to highlight the handle to his club. And for this, I'm coming in with some Ushabti bone. I'm just going to apply this as a thin edge highlight on all the sharpest points. So as you can see here, wherever there's one of these creases or edges to one of the straps, I'm applying a thin edge highlight with Ushabti bone along all of these edges. Just really add some definition to this handle. And with the Ushabti bone applied, there's the handle to the club highlighted. So the next thing I'm going to highlight are all the scales on the troll. So for the scales, I'm coming in with Mechanica Standard Grey. And I'm going to apply this as a chunky highlight to all of the scales. So pick out the edges to every one of the scales with a chunky edge highlight of Mechanica Standard Grey. The reason I'm applying this as a chunky edge highlight is so that we can come back in with another colour shortly and really add interest and definition to all of these areas of black. So just apply a chunky edge highlight to all of the scales on his legs and on his back. Be nice and careful, making sure you only catch the scales. Just apply some Mechanica Standard Grey as a chunky edge highlight to all of the scales. And with that Mechanica Standard Grey applied, you can see it's added some definition to these scales. But by applying a thinner edge highlight within them, will really make them stand out. For this thinner edge highlight, I'm coming in with some Dawnstone. And I'm going to apply this right at the very edges, all of the scales. So you just want to catch the very sharpest corners, leaving some of that Mechanica Standard Grey showing through. Just catching the sharpest points with a really thin edge highlight of Dawnstone on all of the scales. So really take your time at this step, work your way around the model, just pick out all of the sharpest edges with a really thin edge highlight of Dawnstone, leaving just a little bit of Mechanica Standard Grey showing through on all of the scales on the Mordor Troll. And with that Dawnstone applied, you can see it's really made those scales pop and added interest all over the troll. So the next thing I'm going to highlight is all of the armour. For this, I'm coming in with some Stormhost Silver. And I'm going to apply this as an edge highlight to all of the areas that we painted with Leadbelcher. So wherever you've got a sharp angle here, like on these armour plates, I'm catching the very edge with a thin line of Stormhost Silver to brighten up that edge and give the impression of light reflecting off of sharp metal. So once again, really take your time at this step, work your way around the model and pick out all of the sharpest edges and most raised details with a thin edge highlight of Stormhost Silver. So focusing this onto the edges of all of the armour plates and all of the rivets to the armour, I'm just catching every single one of these with a thin edge highlight of Stormhost Silver. And I'm also applying a thin line on each of the spikes on his club, just to act like the light is catching the most raised points. And with that Stormhost Silver applied, that is all of the metallic details highlighted. So the next step is I'm going to base coat his teeth and his claws. So for this, I'm coming in with some Wraithbone. I'm going to apply this all over his claws. So there'll be his toes here, catching all of these details with some Wraithbone, as well as his fingernails and his teeth. Wraithbone gives a really nice base colour for the set. We'll apply to this later to give a really nice bony effect. So just make sure you catch all his fingernails and his toenails and his teeth with a couple of coats of wraithbone. With that wraithbone applied, that's given us a nice base for getting an effect onto these bony areas in a minute. But the next thing we're going to do is paint the eyes to the troll. So for this, I'm coming in with Abaddon Black first. I'm going to sink this into the recesses of the eye sockets, being really careful around all the other areas of skin, just trying to catch the eye socket with some Abaddon Black. So it is awkward working around the helmet. Just use a small brush and just catch the eye sockets with some Abaddon Black. And now with some white scar, I'm going to add a small line in the middle of the areas that we just applied the Abaddon Black. Leaving these nice and small, just in the middle of the black we just applied. And finally, with some Abaddon Black again, I'm going to add a small vertical line in the middle of the white scar. This will act like a pupil. Just keep these nice and small and just apply a small vertical line in the middle of the white scar we just applied. And with the Abaddon Black applied, there's the eyes to the troll painted. So now there is just one final step left to apply to the troll, and that will be to finish painting his teeth and his fingernails. So for this, I'm coming in with some Skeleton Horde contrast paint. And I'm going to apply this over the wraithbone we applied. So, catching his toenails here with a coat of Skeleton Horde, as well as his fingernails, and of course his teeth. Just catching these with some Skeleton Horde contrast paint. This gives a really nice dirty bone effect once it dries. And once the Skeleton Horde has dried, that is the nails and teeth painted to the model. And that is how to easily paint a Mordor Troll for your games of Middle-earth strategy battle game. So thank you very much for watching. Please let me know in the comments down below, are there any other Middle-earth miniatures you would like to see me paint? But please don't forget to like and subscribe, and happy painting!